also recording a video because I can anticipate that most people will probably be joining in the future watching the recorded live stream. I especially know that a lot of teams are based in various parts of the world and in the US, and it is Thanksgiving. It is also obviously the wrong time in a lot of places for a live stream, so I'm going to do this in quite a structured fashion so that it is coherent, hopefully, and a bit succinct. Doesn't take too long, but if any questions do come in, then I will answer them as I go. And this live stream, this Q&A, is aimed at addressing questions that people might have about archaeology, about archaeologists, and the problems that archaeologists face, with a specific focus on the first LEGO League Unearthed challenge. So if you don't know who I am, hi, I'm Rosie. I am an archaeologist. I am one of the career connections experts for this year's first LEGO League challenge, and the career connections playlist will be in the description of this video when it is up as the recorded video. And the question for this year's first LEGO League challenge, the problem that you have to address, is, well, the problem that archaeologists face. So you have to come up with a solution to think about how we can target the problems archaeologists face. And so to start off, what is archaeology? Archaeology is the study of human activity. This can be through the recovery analysis of material culture, but also osteological remains and associated zoological remains, so animals. And I don't do a PhD in Cambridge, I apologise, that won't be the subject of this live stream. So let's get back on topic. I'm going to start by introducing myself and introducing the different types of archaeology, because I think that's always useful. There are so many different types of archaeology, different aspects of archaeology, more sciencey, more literature based. It really is a very varied subject. I personally am an archaeological scientist, so I look at materials, I do a scientific analysis of objects, for example, pre-Hispanic Colombian gold. My project's called Reverse Action. I'm a researcher on that project, and I've looked at lithics and pre-Hispanic gold using X-ray fluorescence and imaging and 3D scanning. This is all one part of archaeology. There's also all of the field work in archaeology. Obviously, if we don't do field work, we don't get artefacts. Some of the artefacts will be from looted contexts or through acquisitions in museums that are, for example, people selling things. But generally, at least now, it's from excavations. So there's that side of archaeology. There is also, as I briefly mentioned, osteoarchaeology and zooarchaeology, so that is a specialism in animals in the archaeological record, and if you're doing human osteoarchaeology, humans and their skeletons in the archaeological record, sorry. And I have a nice human skeleton mug of tea here as well. And my specialism also is in forensic archaeology and anthropology, which is a whole nother aspect of archaeology that at least I didn't know about until I was well through my undergraduate degree. And that is the application of archaeological methods and archaeological thinking to forensic contexts. So that could be humanitarian crises such as in Bosnia, for example, or in Guatemala. It could be in historic archaeology, historic forensic archaeology, so the Second World War, retrieving soldiers and taking them home to be buried on home soil. It could also be archaeology applied to criminal contexts as well, and that could include things like missing persons and murders. Anthropology, forensic anthropology, is looking more at the skeleton, so that is kind of like osteoarchaeology, but more applied to modern contexts, criminal contexts. This is why I don't normally do live streams, because I make so many blunders and normally you can cut them out in editing. So those are some different areas of archaeology, and each area of archaeology brings with it its own problems, of course. For example, field archaeology, you have things like the weather, the terrain, health risks, Timing, funding. A lot of field archaeology is, at least in the UK, is done commercially, so this means that archaeology companies, excavation companies, are hired by larger companies. This could be through a consultancy firm, for example, and the building contractors have to hire archaeologists if this heritage consultancy firm decides that there may be archaeology of interest in that area, that they would like to build something. And so much of the work in the UK for archaeologists comes through that track. There are also excavations which happen as part of academic projects, for example, university digs, community digs. For example, there is one that just will be reopening in summer with Time Team on Orkney at the Ness of Brodgar. They had closed up the excavation, but some more funding came, more interest came, they found a new anomaly, and that will be reopening. Some other problems with field archaeology could be with bureaucracy and infrastructure and also ethics, but that is a big overarching problem that is in all aspects of archaeology. You have also engagement with local communities, whether that is your own local community around the excavation, or if you're doing archaeology that is of Indigenous ancestors, then you have potentially local Indigenous communities that are living there now, and they also need involvement as well as the things like site protection. How do you look after the site once the site is open, once you've exposed things? For example, you might excavate a mosaic. How do you protect that mosaic when it's now exposed to the elements? When people could come and loot, if people know that there's a Roman site, a Roman villa site, they might then start looking for coins amongst the excavation. And that needs thinking about, as well as things like the curation of objects. How do objects get from the excavation to the lab or to the museums, to the stores? And this is something that I was actually talking about with a local team to me as well, about how we transport objects from one place to another. And quite frankly, at the minute, it's secure, but you bag things up at the site. It might be wet, it might be raining, you try and dry things out, but it's not always possible. Those bags go in the back of a car or a van and they get driven to HQ, to the archaeology unit HQ, and then they sit on the shelves until somebody wants to process those finds and ultimately maybe also study those finds. So this leads us into the next aspect of archaeology, and that is the lab and archaeological science. What problems do we have specifically when we're analysing objects, when we're trying to think about exactly why objects are in the context that they're in, what were they used for, who was using them? It all comes with its own problems. The biggest of those problems being with destructive analysis. How can we look at objects and think about how people used objects in the past without damaging them in any way? And if we want to do quite heavy science, for example, electron microscopy, we might want to see the inside of an object. We can't really do that without destroying it. One way we could try and do this is with micro CT scanning. And this also links to ethics. Is the question that we're asking worth the damage to the object which may happen if we go through with the analysis? For example, is it worth the cost? Is it worth the time? The answer is not always yes. And then you change your thinking and you change your plan and you do something else. So sampling decisions, again, same sort of train of thought. You need to think about the problems that you want to tackle in terms of what do you want to learn? What is it that you actually need to know? And therefore, do you have to use a specific method? Is a specific method perhaps not useful to you and actually is not worth your time in doing it. And I would say actually for this reason that the questions, and this is for science as well, questions that you want to ask should be your starting point. And actually, Steph Black gave a really interesting talk at Cambridge a few weeks ago for the Cambridge Archaeological Field Society, and she was talking about archaeology as storytelling. And one of the exercises that she did in this talk was give a few basic facts about a site, about somebody at a site, and you had to come up with the story about that person. And I would say that this is actually a really, really nice thinking exercise with archaeology generally, in order to try and plan what it is you want to know, what it is you need to know, and what materials you need in order to find out what you want to know. And you do that by attempting to tell the story of the object or the person, and then you think about what you're missing, what would be really interesting to know. For example, say you have a person with a sword, and that sword isn't normally found in this area. What questions are you going to ask? You need to be thinking about the metal. Where did it come from? Where did they get it? Why does this person have this type of sword and not another person at that site? Is this person special? How did they travel? Do they miss their home? Did they bring the sword with them? There are so many questions that we want to ask, and this is always where we need to start before we're thinking about analysis. And that is not necessarily a problem in archaeology, but it's certainly something that we have to think about. And if we're doing analysis, as always, as in all scientific disciplines, note-taking is a massive thing. You need to make sure that you're constantly looking out for problems with your methods and being meticulous with your samples, because as soon as you make a mistake or you have missing data, if you haven't noticed it and written it down and then you come back to it later, you're going to have to start all over again. And that's rough, believe me, you don't want to be doing that. Which leads me into another big problem, and one which people are starting to tackle and might be a really interesting one to think about tackling for First Lego League, given that you guys are going to be from a robotics sort of background. And that is, what do we do with all of the data that we produce, all of the digital data that we produce? And this is getting bigger and bigger as archaeology starts using more 3D analysis types like micro CT, 3D scanning, other imaging. This is really, really big data. And when I say big data, I don't mean big data in the statistical sense, I mean the actual size of the files, but also in the big data sense separately, there's going to be lots and lots of data that we need to think about, both storage and secure storage, especially if it is things like human remains and ancestral knowledge. We need to store this carefully and ensure that it's curated in a way that is accessible but secure. And we need to be thinking practically in terms of, if the files are too big, what do we do with them? Not all data is suitable for the cloud, but not all data is suitable for a hard drive. And we've not quite got there yet, but it's happening. It's happening. We haven't got any questions just yet, so let's think about one key problem, in archaeology, and talk it through. One of which, let's go with stratigraphy, because stratigraphy in archaeology, this is going back to excavation here, stratigraphy is often how we date a site. It's how we understand how different aspects of a site are linked together, how they interacted. For example, if you have coins or pottery in one stratigraphic layer, they're going to be dated differently to a different stratigraphic layer. I wish I could put pictures on the screen right now, but stratigraphic layers are essentially occupation layers that tell you when people were there. You might have disturbances in these layers where people have dug pits into an older, essentially an older ground. But then you also get layers of charcoal or layers of ash where things like volcanic eruptions have happened or big fires have happened. I'm almost certain there will be a layer of charcoal in London marking, for example, the Great Fire of London. There is a layer of burnt ground also in Verulamium, which is St Albans now. And then from that we can say, yeah, that is when the Iceni tribe and Boudica had their revolution, and we know they burnt all of these things. And so that's stratigraphy. But what happens when it's disturbed? How do we interpret that? Things like animals burrowing through the stratigraphy, or there are cases, at least in the past I know of, that the building companies have gone in and disturbed the context, disturbed the stratigraphy before the archaeologists could get there. How do we face those problems? Is there a practical solution to things like rabbits burrowing through stratigraphy, or people accessing the site who perhaps don't respect the process that we need to be following in order to learn as much as we can and save as much as we can from the excavation? And actually, based on this comment that's just come through, evolution studies and bioanthropology is another aspect of archaeology, which has its own problems in that it is so old that there's a lot you can learn, but there's also a lot you have to guesstimate, infer. For example, we find stone tools and maybe bits of animal bone and not a whole lot more. Maybe some dotted charcoal layers, and we have to piece together these bits of a jigsaw and form a sort of detective puzzle to figure out what's going on. And things don't survive very long. What do we do when objects are 100,000 years old or tens of thousands of years old and they're super fragmented? We don't have any written records. How can we interpret that? We can analyze broken objects. We can analyze things that are fragmented. We don't need textual evidence to be able to try and understand why a site is the way it is. But it's always going to be harder the older things are, because the less survives for that amount of time. And thinking about survival and fragmentary evidence, this brings us to things like biomolecular archaeology, so DNA and proteomics and metabolomics, and this has its own caveats, which a lot of people in the discipline are also trying to target, and again, not necessarily there yet, but there are advances constantly at the moment in things like DNA studies, aDNA, looking at pathogen DNA to see what sort of diseases people might have had in the past and how these diseases evolved. And this again brings us back to things like statistics and data. And another problem in archaeology is that we need a statistical background now with all the data that we're getting. Archaeologists are often playing catch up in that we weren't necessarily taught statistics from the get-go. This is changing now. Most archaeology courses will have statistics from the get-go, but if you are wanting to get into archaeology, I would definitely consider also getting into statistics and learning about programs like R and multimodal regression modeling. We just had a seminar today about this, that's why it's on my mind. And there's a lot of ways you can learn to do this just from tutorials on YouTube, but every little helps with that. It's all about data right now. I guess that's one of our biggest problems at the minute. Yes, I'm at Cambridge Archaeology, yeah. But I'm not a student, I'm a researcher, I'm a staff. My background was actually I started at Oxford, did archaeology and anthropology as a dual degree, and then I did a master's in forensic archaeology and anthropology. Okay, we've got 10 minutes, so I think I'm going to focus on science because that is my expertise. So in particular, I'm thinking things like ethics. For example, if you're studying human remains, how are you going to make this as respectful as possible? How are you going to ensure that everything that you're learning from this individual about this individual has been done so in a way that is ethically conscious, isn't destructive in any way, isn't disrespectful or unnecessary? How do you then store this data, but also the individual themselves? And the answer is that it's a big debate right now in archaeology, honestly. But I would say there are really, really good guidelines out. So, for example, the British Association for, oh my goodness, this is terrible. It's BABIO, but it's the British Association for Bioanthropology and Osteoarchaeology, I think. I always get the second B wrong, so sorry if BABIO, if you're watching this and I've got it wrong. But they have really good guidelines, and also CIFA, the Chartered Institute Forensic for Archaeologists, their forensic special interest group, has good guidelines for when you're looking at skeletal remains, human skeletal remains, in particular how you deal with imaging and 3D imaging, how you deal with the data, the storage, and just the approach to studying them. Because there is a lot you can do with bone, and this goes for animal as well. You could do isotope analysis and DNA analysis and paleopathology. So, for example, disease affects the skeleton in a lot of ways. If you have an illness like tuberculosis for a really long time as your bones are still growing, this can affect the skeleton. The same can be said for smallpox. Shameless plug, but I do have a paper on that, on smallpox and how it impacts the skeleton. Hi everyone, is that Ananya? Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, and Rasabeni? Apologies if I've butchered both of your names there. But hi, thank you for joining. What else can we do with human remains or other bones? Well, we can do proteomics. This one is so cool. And this is also something we can do with ceramics. So if you have a ceramic vessel, for example, or if you have, I don't know, say you've got a mummy and it had some hair that is left, or even this could be animal hair, for example, or eggshell, anything organic that lived at some point, you can, with the caveat being that often it's degraded and it can be contaminated very easily, you can look at the proteins and maybe the species, the biological sex, And if you're thinking, for example, oh, what did people eat on that ceramic vessel, you might have remnants of foodstuffs, and maybe it's cereals or milk. Different types of milk products can have different signatures as well. There's a paper by one of my friends, Miranda, who has looked at just that, whether you can say something is cheese or whether it's just general milk lipids. Yeah, it's all super interesting. But as I was saying there, the big problem with this sort of study is contamination. We have to know from the get-go, we need to be thinking what analysis we might need to be doing with artifacts in the future. So we can't just take it straight out of the ground. We need to be thinking, okay, this object has the potential to go for proteomics or for DNA analysis. We need to make sure we have gloves, a mask, proper PPE when we're excavating this, when we're analysing it, so that in the future, when people are taking a sample to send for analysis, they're not then basically sending something off that is going to give you a duff result because it's been contaminated all the way through by people handling it and excavating it and passing it on to the next person. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it, and that it doesn't happen because there's no time and there's no funding, and this isn't necessarily a problem with anybody at all, and I don't know necessarily yet if it's a problem that we can face with where we are in archaeology right now. You need to be thinking through everything, have funding from the get-go and an idea of what you'll be able to access when you're in the lab. But I think a good start would be to just, if you find something cool, assume that you might want to take a sample in full PPE, if possible, for lab analysis at a later date. Now then, we do have a question. What is the change of human evolution and environmental archaeology in the last 50,000 years? Well, that is a very big question. I mean, in the last 50,000 years across the world, we have changed at different rates. The environment has changed at different rates. But paleoanthropology and Paleolithic archaeology is where you want to be looking if you want to learn about this sort of stuff. So in the last 50,000 years is when we were seeing things like cave art, and this is when humans, Homo sapiens, were here, and also the end of sort of the Neanderthals. A lot was happening about that time. And then very quickly, from about 15,000 years ago, people were developing even faster. So at this point, we've just got Homo sapiens. And around, you've got kind of 13,000 years ago is Epipaleolithic, where your Paleolithic, which is in the media what you would see as Stone Age, that is the Paleolithic. That started becoming more towards the Neolithic. So the Neolithic, if you're looking at the textbook definition, is when people started cultivating and growing cereals and crops, agriculture. And this first emerged in the Levant area. And that area, I guess the conditions were perfect. And yeah, it happened about 12,000 years ago, and then the Younger Dryas was coming to an end around that period. You need to Google this. This is a lot. I need way more time than 1 minute 30 seconds to keep explaining this. But basically around 10,000 years ago is when the real boom in Neolithic archaeology, when it emerged. And then you go through the Mesolithic and Where am I? No, my brain's going faster than I can speak. And now I'm losing everybody, so I'm just gonna go on to the next. Will taking humanities and applied mathematics help me? Yes. Yeah, for sure. Statistical modelling in archaeology is really big now. I mean, I don't do it, and that's fine, but it is a big discipline. So if you like maths, then absolutely you can use that in archaeology for sure. And I would always say, anyway, a mixture between humanities and sciences is a perfect background for archaeology. With that being said, I know so many archaeologists who have come from different disciplines. So they started in chemistry, or they started in law, or English literature. A lot of people come from all over the place, figuratively and literally. Is it hard to get a job in archaeology? That depends. It really depends on which aspect of archaeology you're looking for. So in England, commercial archaeology has to be done when they're building a new project, or a new road, or a new railway, for example, housing estate. So there are a lot of archaeologists required for this. However, it's often very short temporary contracts, and they're not paid very much. And so it isn't necessarily stable in terms of that job. There's also academic archaeology. You could work like I do in a university in the labs. Academic jobs, you're likely going to need definitely an undergrad, probably a master's, and then if you want anything more than a research assistant, probably a PhD, which is what I hopefully plan to be doing next. And then you can work in a museum or in heritage. I have friends who did archaeology and then went into heritage consultancy. So they are essentially the middleman who gets proposals for building sites and building projects off building companies, construction companies. They then do desk-based surveys to see if that specific area needs archaeology, if it has any interesting features like geophysics or anything, and then if they think it does, they then have basically there's a bidding war for which archaeology company wants to come in and do the excavations in that region. And it will depend on if that company can afford it and has enough archaeologists, and quite often several archaeology companies have to come together to do that one site. And that is archaeology in the UK. I don't really know much about archaeology outside of the UK, to be honest. I know in Colombia, because my project that I'm on, reverse action, is with working with archaeologists in Colombia. That is similar in that it's either people who work in the museum and work academically in the universities, but also they have, I think it's in the engineering firms quite often, they have archaeologists working for those firms. Otherwise, I'm afraid I don't know. Oh, my tea's gone cold. I forgot about it, and that was not very enjoyable. Okay, I actually have so much to do this evening, so if you have any more questions, I'll stay for 5 minutes and I'll answer anything that you have in those next 5 minutes. If you want to ask more questions after that, then just go over to my Instagram and DM me and I'll answer them there. There is also a blog post linked in the description of this video, which I don't know if it's there yet, but definitely when this turns it into a recorded live stream, you'll be able to see the link to a blog post which I curated with my colleagues in Reverse Action at Cambridge, all about the different problems that we face, the different aspects of artifact analysis, and that will be really helpful to anyone doing first LEGO League. And if you want to know about archaeology careers, my entire journey into archaeology is documented on this YouTube channel, so you can watch all of my vlogs from the age of 18, in fact younger, 17, doing my interview for uni. God knows, I don't want to watch that back, so God knows what that's like, but yeah, everything is on there. You know my whole career history, it's on there. And with that, if you want more archaeology, actually right now, it's nothing to do with Cambridge. The Council for British Archaeological Achievement Awards are being live streamed on YouTube right now. So I'm going to switch over to watch that, because last year, I have the trophy here. Last year, I was there with Steph the archaeologist, in Cardiff. This year they're at Queen's University Belfast, and yeah, I know quite a few people who are up for awards, which is lovely, so best of luck everyone. And if you want your archaeology fix, then switch over to that. Is AI changing archaeological work? The answer is yes, which I think is unsurprising. It's changing every discipline right now, to be honest, and because that is such a big topic, I will say that from either January or February, there is going to be a weekly seminar which is usually shared online. You can access it. It's called the Garrod Seminar Series at the University of Cambridge. The whole topic for the next series of Garrod seminars is about AI in archaeology. So you'll have to wait a bit, but hopefully it will be worth it. And obviously they're free to watch. The joining links are generally just on the internet. And if you can't find it on the Cambridge website, there's a website called Talks at Cam, and that will also have, not yet because I don't think they finalised the term card, but that will have a list of all of those talks that are going to be happening. You will teach in anthropology YouTube. I have some videos teaching archaeology already and paleoanthropology, not loads, but if you look at some of my shorts, for example, they're teaching about different sites. So yeah, another shameless plug, but subscribe to me if you're interested in archaeology. And I have a few videos that are planned, at least I've already drafted, some of them are already filmed, to teach other topics as well, because I would love to teach more specifically about paleopathology, so the history of the diseases on the skeleton, and other sciencey stuff, I guess. Yes, I would have thought so. And then so yeah, AI has been helpful. It is also detrimental in some ways, as it is in general, I guess. We just need to not be too reliant on it. The good thing about archaeology is it is generally about stories and storytelling, and that is an aspect that AI is never going to replicate. So there's that. And actually, on that note, I'm gonna sign off, because that's what archaeology is. It is storytelling, and credits for that go to Steph, because that is what her talk was on for the Cambridge Archaeological Field School, which I mentioned before. So thank you so much to everybody who has joined for the past 40 minutes. And if you're not watching live, again, thank you for joining. I hope it's been somewhat helpful in at least sparking some ideas and giving you some inspiration for your first LEGO League or career interests in archaeology discussions. Yeah, this has been fun. Maybe I'll do them more often. I will reheat my tea, yes, because it's waste. It's a full cup. Okay, bye.